Hey guys, it's Victoria. So in this video, I wanted to talk to you about the trickiest, most elusive consonant letter that I think exists in the entire English alphabet. Now, I know you know that I'm talking about the letter T because you read my title, but this letter, guys, is so tricky and nuanced that you are gonna be shocked by all the different things that can happen when you see this simple little letter written down. So I want you to take a guess. How many sounds can the letter T make in English? Now, yes, some of you, I know, are probably saying 4, because I heard that somewhere else, or I read that somewhere. And that is a small part of the story. And it would be awesome if that was the whole story, but it is not the whole story. And there are, in fact, 10 different sounds that the one letter T can make in English. That's crazy. That's a lot of different sounds. So as you guys know, English is not a very phonetic language, meaning the spelling doesn't have a one-to-one correspondence to the sounds that we produce. However, in most languages, the letter T is pretty consistent. So in most languages, the letter T is an alveolar or maybe dental plosive. What that means is that the position of your tongue is either at your alveolar ridge, so those bumps right behind your teeth, and in some languages it's dental, so it's right at your upper teeth. And plosive means that it's a sound in which you cut off airflow for a split second, and then you release it in a burst. So that is what most people expect when they see the letter T. But in English, we do so much more than that. Now, here's where things get a little bit tricky. It is that the letter T is this big phonemic category. What that means is in a native speaker's brain, there are a lot of variants of the sound that still count in their brains as the letter T. So even though the acoustic quality of some of these variants might be absolutely, totally different, if you look the word up in a dictionary, guess what letter is going to be there? A big old T. So it can be really confusing if you're not a native English speaker to be like, well, I'm hearing this, but I guess I'm not because the dictionary is telling me it's a letter T, and I know that the letter T makes the T sound. So we're going to talk about all 10 contexts now, guys. I'm going to start from the broadest, the most common stereotypical, and I'm going to get narrower and narrower and narrower down to the really weird one, the really tricky one that you've probably never heard about before. So I'll mention too, guys, that I am going to be getting a little bit technical. I am going to be throwing out some linguistic phrases here and there. So you probably have to self-identify as at least like partnered to fully appreciate this video. But if you are partnered like myself, then please subscribe to my channel because there'll be lots more nerdy linguistic stuff to come. All right, so number 1 is if we have the letter T at the beginning of a stressed syllable. If that happens, we are going to produce our T sound with a lot of what's called aspiration. That literally just means a burst of high kind of frequency noise. T, t, t. That is what it sounds like. Very different from different alveolar plosives in other languages in which there is no aspiration. So to a native English speaker, if you are saying an alveolar plosive without the aspiration, their ear might actually think sometimes that you're saying a D instead of a T. So any word that has the primary stress on that syllable with T at the beginning of that syllable is going to have that high aspiration. Time, tea, today, tomorrow, etc., etc., etc. So this is also true, however, if you have the winning syllable somewhere within your word. So it's not necessarily at the start of your word. So potato chips, potato chips, or entirely, entirely, or the word attainable, attainable. So you can really hear that pitchiness, that noise on all of those syllable initial letter T's. So number 2 is if we have the letter T in what's called a consonant blend. All that means is that you're blending together 2 consonant sounds back to back with no vowel sound in between. And the most common one that pops into my mind is ST, like stop, but there are other ones that you'll also encounter. So I want you guys to listen to these 2 words that I'm going to read you and keep at the back of your mind this idea of aspiration. So we have top, stop, top, stop. Can you tell that in stop, there is no aspiration on my T? Stop, stop. It's almost like a D sound. If you were to literally pause me right after I say my S and play the rest of the word, you might think I'm saying dop, dop. But when I say top, top, there's a lot of aspiration. So acoustically, they are very, very different sounds. But like I said before, there's nothing in an online or other dictionary that's going to indicate that to you. So it's just something you need to be aware of, start to listen for, and practice. A few other examples that come to mind: after, after, where that T is not the primary stress and the FT is our consonant blend, you're going to hear not nearly as much aspiration as if I said turkey, turkey. Same syllable, right? Tur, after, turkey. Now, how about STR and TR? Some of my clients ask me about that. Is the T aspirated or unaspirated? Because it does sound awfully noisy. And you're right, it does sound awfully noisy or high-pitched, but in fact, we are not making an aspirated T there, nor are we making an unaspirated T. We are making a totally different sound that we'll talk about in just a little bit. So number 3 is what's called the unreleased T, or sometimes it's called the held T. So basically all this means is that your tongue is going into its position of the alveolar ridge. And you know how we said earlier that in a traditional T, you build up air pressure and you release that air pressure? Well, you don't do that if the T is unreleased. You're going to do half the process. So you're going to bring your tongue up to your alveolar ridge, and that's it. You're going to stop your air. So if I say cat, cat, that is an unreleased final T. Or if I say Batman, Batman. So the rule for this one is that you unrelease your T if it's at the end of a syllable. So like in our example of Batman, I know it looks like it's somewhere within the word, but the end of the syllable is the word bat, Batman. It would be unexpected to hear Batman, Batman with a released T. If I was to delete the T entirely, which some of my clients think that native speakers do sometimes, then it wouldn't sound like bat, bat. It would sound like ba, ba, like the noise a sheep would make, right? So listen to how long I hold my vowel when I say bat, ba, bat, ba. Because in bat, I am bringing my tongue up and stopping my airflow, you're going to hear a sudden nothingness. Versus when I say ba, I'm slowly letting my ah sound die out. So acoustically, it's subtle, but again, it's a really important distinction and one you'll really want to tune your ears into because unreleased T's are huge. Now, there are a few exceptions to when we actually have to release the T in the final position of a syllable. And that's when that T is in a consonant blend. So the 4 consonant blends that force you to release your T are pt, ft, st, kt. For example, slept, crept, prepped. If I didn't say the T, it would sound like slept, prep. So totally different word, right? For FT, we have left, laughed, craft. For ST, we have past, last, missed. And for KT, we have walked, project, blocked. So our next one here is very similar to an unreleased T, but if again we're getting really, really technical, it's a little bit different. And that is when you produce a glottal stop instead of a traditional T. So a glottal stop is simply when you take your vocal folds and you slam them together, literally at the level of your throat. Now, some of you guys may be saying, no idea how to do that. And most of you probably will do it no problem. Try saying this. Uh-oh, uh-oh, When I'm saying I'm really quickly stopping my airflow right in my throat here, and that is a glottal stop. So you will hear a glottal stop often in American English if the sound right after is what's called a syllabic N. That's a really heavy N that carries the weight of a whole syllable. So if you have mountain, mountain, or Clinton, Clinton, or button, button, those are all glottal stops followed by an N sound. Now, if you are thinking, but it sounds the exact same as an unreleased T, you're right. You're totally right. And in fact, there's some debate, there's some controversy. Do we actually do an unreleased T, or is it a glottal stop? Or some people think that they actually possibly do both at the same time. The point is that no, you can't hear the difference. However, sometimes it's easier to produce one than the other. Like if I say mountain, mountain, I know I'm doing a glottal stop, because for me to say mount, unreleased T, and then make an N, it just feels a lot more awkward and cumbersome. So I think it's important for you guys to know what native speakers are actually doing without maybe even thinking about it, so that if you're having a hard time coordinating your sounds, you can try to problem solve and figure out why. So number 5 is the very popular flap, the alveolar flap sound, or the flap T sound. So this is an extremely popular variant of the letter T in American English, and I made a couple other videos about it, so I'll link that for you guys up behind me. But very quickly, a flap is the really, really controlled, quick tap to your alveolar ridge that you hear in words like city, pretty, garden. There are so many. You can also get a flap combining two words if you have a word ending in the letter T or D and the following word beginning with a vowel. So I had a nice time, or caught up, I caught up with her. So you get the idea there. Alveolar flap, really, really common in North American English. Number 6 is when there is no T at all. So we're literally totally deleting, eliminating any sort of sound at all. So it's not a glottal stop, because a glottal stop, the nothingness means something. But in this case, I mean, it's like the spelling was just to trick you, and maybe it was. So words like winner, internet, center are really commonly heard in the US. It's not wrong to say the T. You will also hear people saying winter, internet, center, but it's more common in a lot of the dialects to totally get rid of that T entirely. And then there's a few words that there's a T in the spelling, but it's not possible to include the T. Like, you entirely have to delete it. Like the word listen, listen. There's no dialect or context in which you can actually say listen. That just doesn't work. Or Christmas. There's never a T. It's never Christmas. It's always totally gone. So moral of the story is, don't trust English spelling. Number 7 is when the letter T makes the sound ch, ch. So we said T is traditionally an alveolar sound, right? But the ch sound is palatal, meaning your tongue is making contact with your palate further back than the T sound. And we can usually get this happen if you have the letter T followed by the letter R. And the reason for that is because in American English, we like to assimilate. We like to bring sounds closer together if that's possible. And where the R sound is produced further back, we're also taking the T and making it further back so that they're easier to coordinate. So most TR words will follow this rule. So people do not say try, or what else did I write here? Tradition, trip. People really tend to say trying, truck, tradition, trip, transit, etc. So in a traditional English spelling, think of the letters CH, right? Like a chip. So that's exactly what's happening. And that's why some of my clients perceive that in that blend, the T is getting aspiration. It's not an aspirated T, it just happens to be a noisier ch sound. And the other context in which the letter T can make a ch sound is in some words where it's followed by the letter U. So what do we have here? Situate, adventure, mature, fortunate. You get the idea for those. So last one here, where the letter T can become ch, is for the ending T-I-O-N. A ton of T-I-O-N endings are actually the sound chun, chun. So if English made sense, there would be the letter CH, but alas, what can you do? So invention, attention, convention, everything chin, a lot of options there. So we're getting there, guys. Number 8 is when the letter T makes the sound sh, as in shh, the child is sleeping. And very often, again, T-I-O-N, either it's becoming chin, like we just saw, or it can become shin, like action or imagination. Once in a while, you might hear TU make a sh sound, but I feel there's some variation there. So like some people, for example, say actually, that's what I think they're saying. Other people, I hear it definitely as more of a ch sound actually. So something to listen for, but either way, not very common on the TU to make a sh sound. Number 8 is when we have the letter T combining with the letter H. That's a pretty common one, right? So typically we get either the sound th or th. So like think or them. However, just be aware that that's not always the case. So sometimes the letters TH actually combine and make an aspirated syllable initial t sound like we saw in number 1. So some examples that come to mind: Thomas and Teresa, the names. Thomas, Teresa. We do not say Thomas, Theresa, even though usually that's how those names are spelled. Another one that comes to mind, and not many do, is time, like the herb. So obviously it's spelled T-H-Y-M-E, but we do not say thyme, we say time. Number 10, you made it. So this one is really, really tricky. The number 10 rule for the letter T is when it combines with the letter S. And most native speakers have no idea that they're actually making not a plosive, not a fricative. So is it fricative? They're making a combination of the two. So it's called an affricate, and where our tongue is at our alveolar ridge, it's called an alveolar affricate. And that doesn't seem like it would be a big deal, but actually it's a really tricky sound to make. So you make contact with your alveolar ridge and your tongue, and there's a moment of nothing, just like you would have for a traditional T, but then instead of releasing the T as a burst, you turn it into a S sound. So it sounds like tss, tss. And there is, actually that's a lie. I was going to say there are very, very few words in English that have the tss sound at the beginning of a syllable. So if that is the case, it's going to be a borrowed word from a different language, like tsunami, tsunami. And in fact, because that's such a weird thing for native English speakers to do, it's totally allowable and really common to say it with an S. Tsunami, tsunami. So this becomes tricky for my clients because if they actually have trouble making that affricate, there are a lot of these in the final position of English words. So if you have a word ending with a T and you make it regular plural, then we're making an affricate. And so it's interesting because oftentimes my clients feel that they have trouble with plurals, but it's really very specifically that they have trouble with alveolar affricates, and so instead of making an affricate, they'll just release a T like a T. So instead of cats, cats, they might say cat, cat. Or there's lots of these, right? Oats or mitts. You get the idea. So that's it, guys. The 10 different sounds that the one letter T can make. It's crazy. It's a lot of information, and some of it, like you saw, is really, really, really subtle. But again, you really need to tune into these really fine details if you want to perfect your accent and sound just like a native speaker. So I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And in the next few weeks, I'm going to be putting together a practice video for the letter T in which you can really put these rules into action and see how you do. So if you want to be informed about when that happens, please subscribe and YouTube will notify you. So thanks so much again for watching, you guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye.